Gentlemen and boys and girls, thank you for coming to DRI's May Science Be With You event. I have the pleasure of introducing to you our keynote speaker. I first discovered him through some Star Wars friends and quickly became friends with David and really followed him through his journeys. And he's got some amazing stories to tell, and you will be in awe of the stories you're about to hear behind the scenes of Star Wars. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our keynote speaker, David Reynolds, to DRI. Thank you, sir.
There are places in the real world that are also gateways to the worlds of imagination. And that's what we're going to talk about. The archaeology of Star Wars. We start with archaeology. This is Aulis. It's a site in Greece, specific geographic location. You can pull up on a map and pinpoint the GPS, but it's also a setting in the epic poems of Homer, who wrote about the Trojan War and the Iliad and the Odyssey. And if you have read those stories and you were affected by them, then if you went to Aulis, you might find that the most vivid part of the experience of being there is to know that this was the place in the story where King Agamemnon has to decide whether the Trojan War is worth the price of sacrificing his daughter to the gods to make the winds change so that the fleet can start their expedition to Troy. Visiting Aulis, if you've read those stories, you might find that the story was a more vivid part of the experience of being there than even seeing these very interesting ancient ruins. So there are places where reality and the worlds of imagination mix, and those are the kinds of things that I like to go in search of. What you find is that the stories we tell about a place can become more important than the rocks and stones that are actually there. And I'm not the first person to think this way. Heinrich Schliemann is what we nowadays call a major fanboy. In the 1800s, he grew up loving the stories of Homer. He read them over and over again. He savored these stories. For him, it was almost like it was real. And he grew up wanting to have as vivid an experience of these things as possible. And so he got it into his head that he wanted to go and visit the locations that Homer mentions, like Aulis, like I just talked about. But the archaeologists, my predecessors, said, well, you can't do that. Homer's fiction. This is imagination. These are real places, yes, but none of this really happened, and so you can't go to those places. Schliemann had read Homer so intensely that he said, there's so many clues. He talks about the bay at Aulis. He talks about this. He talks about them crossing this cape. All of these things he mentioned, the plains before Troy, where Achilles and Hector fight before the river Scamander there. I mean, all of this geography, it just seemed so real to him that he was just driven. It's like, I want to try. The archaeologists laughed at him, but he took his copy of the Iliad and the Odyssey and a shovel, and he went to Greece, and he went to Turkey, and he followed every clue in the stories. He noted carefully everything that Homer said. When did the character do this? How close were they to the river when this battle happened? Well, and he would get to a place and think, that should be right about here. And what Heinrich Schliemann did was discover the ruins of Troy. He found the walls of Troy. He found the grave of King Agamemnon. He found that there was much more in Homer that was historical than anybody ever guessed. So he succeeded beyond his wildest dreams, going off to try to walk in an imaginary world and finding that the places where the real world intersected with fantasy could be some of the richest places to visit, even though they weren't supposed to be real at all. Tim Severin wanted to retrace the classical voyage of Jason and the Argonauts, venturing into the unknown Black Sea on the quest of the legendary Golden Fleece. Tim Severin did it in style. He built himself a copy of Jason's ship to go sailing around the Black Sea with a copy of Jason and the Argonauts in hand. And his whole voyage illuminates for us so much about how that story was shaped by its locations and about the historical period in which that story was created. So I'm not the first archaeologist to take an interest in the places where reality and imagination mix. And I wanted to do something similar to what these guys had done. But the classic drama that inspired me was not a 3,000-year-old work of literature. It was a movie called Star Wars. But it's still an epic, right? It's still a battle of good and evil. It's still heroes battling against supernatural powers, even though my drama has spaceships rather than sailing ships in it. I loved Star Wars when I first saw it as a kid. It was so compelling to me because it seemed so real. The Star Wars universe is far away and exotic, but I'm looking on screen and seeing that the home planet of Luke Skywalker, this desert planet called Tatooine, it just seemed real. I wanted to be there because that drama was so compelling to me. I wanted to go there somehow. I didn't know how that could be possible, but even as a kid, I wanted to walk into that movie screen and be in that world. And I wanted that all my life. There are two reasons why people that focus on a drama might be interested in the real-world locations. The first reason is that understanding an artist's influences always helps you understand the artwork better. It helps you contextualize the artwork when you understand what influenced that artist when he created that artwork, or what shaped her as she created that storyline. Was it historical people or historical events, historical battles, or other artworks, other artists, or in this case, locations? Understanding an artist's influences is always a better way, helpful way to understand an artwork, whether you're studying Homer or Shakespeare or George Lucas. So this is a way of understanding an artwork better. The second reason that somebody might be interested in something like this is more personal. And Schliemann and Severin would understand this, but a lot of my colleagues don't. A lot of my colleagues in academia feel like we have to hold everything at arm's length, and that even the most incredible stories, we have to discuss them in very dry and tedious fashions, because otherwise you can't be professional. And there are always those of us, though, who are actually inspired by what we study, who want illumination, who want to engage the drama as richly as possible. And so for those of us who are after that experience of getting as close to the artwork as possible, the real-world locations that figure into a story offer one way of doing that, of experiencing the artwork more richly. So those were my motivations, and the search was really not that different from the others undertaken before it, but it had a completely different aspect of involving an alien planet. Now I said Tatooine, that's Luke Skywalker's home planet. It felt so real, and it looked so real. I could tell that's not a digital effect. That's not a sound stage. I don't know how, but somewhere that's real. That's what made this so compelling to me. And the way that they created this through movie magic, we can see anything now due to computer effects. But in this first movie, I knew what I was seeing was real. They were standing in it. Couldn't I stand in it somehow? Years and years later, I'm finishing up a PhD in archaeology. That's how I've chosen to do my life path. It's 1995, and I'm getting it into my head that I know about archaeology enough now that maybe I could track those locations down. They were shot in a country called Tunisia in North Africa, right just south of Italy. And I'd worked in North Africa now. I'd worked in Egypt. I knew how to track things down. It might be possible. And it also occurred to me when I worked in Egypt, one of our team members, the desert preserves everything. One of our team members found a Roman girl's rag doll that she had dropped 2,000 years ago, and it looked like she dropped it last week. It was a rag doll that the desert preserved for 2,000 years. Now, when I looked at that doll, I thought, now wait a minute, maybe there's not just the locations that I could find. That film crew was in Tunisia only 20 years ago. This thing is from 2,000 years ago. Just 20 years ago, anything they dropped, it might still be there. So I started to think maybe there wasn't just locations. Maybe I could even find a trace of Star Wars if I set out to find them. Now, I mentioned this to a couple of my colleagues. Now, they said, look, two things. First of all, this is a stupid idea. It's a foolish waste of time. Why would anybody do this? That's number one. Number two, it's impossible. There is no way you're going to take pictures from that movie you like and go wandering around an entire foreign country. What, are you just going to go to every rock and say, is this one it? There is no way you can do this. It's a waste of time. But I was thinking, Didn't we tell that to Heinrich Schliemann about 100 years ago? And we ended up with egg on our face from that one. When somebody's determined to do something, it's not a good idea to tell them it's impossible. And whenever I hear that about one of my ideas, oh, that's impossible, it provokes me. So I decided, well, I'm not going to tell them about it. I'm going to do this in secret, but I am going to try to find those locations. The question was, how? And the answer was the techniques of archaeology that they've been teaching me for all these years while I'm getting my PhD. When we were in Egypt, we were tracing down Roman caravan routes from the Nile to the Red Sea. And what I learned about this was one of the key things you've got to do is cut down the search territory. Use every factor you can to cut things down and just search where you have to. Don't go searching about everything. There are always ways to trim down the areas you might need to search in. So I prepared as well as I could. I decided to use every available form of data. I was looking at geology, geography. I was looking at the shape of the rocks in the movies. Were they angled or were they straight? I look at maps of Tunisia. Where are there mountains? Most places there weren't mountains high enough to see some of the things we'd seen in the movie. Where were there not only sand dunes, but places where you could look all the way to the horizon and still see nothing else? That means you're deep in the desert. So that starts cutting down my search territory. And so I'm an archaeologist who decides I'm going to find these locations. I'm going to try this. And in the end, I accomplished both my goals. I learned how the real world locations shaped and influenced Star Wars, and you will see that. But I also walked in two worlds. I walked in the real world where Star Wars was made, and I set foot on Luke Skywalker's home planet. And that was a successful trip. The first thing I needed to do, though, was to assemble an international team of adventurers equal to the challenge, which means that the only two friends I had that were crazy enough to do this were both Canadian. This is Michael Ryan, a dinosaur hunter. Dinosaur hunters are a pretty hardy lot. They're pretty much up for anything. I knew he'd be willing to do whatever. If I had a good challenge, he'd be up for it. So I said, Michael, this time I'm going to go in search of the planet Tatooine. He'd just gotten back from Central Africa, and he's like, okay, planet Tatooine. I said, it is fictional. And he's like, that's okay, let's go. That's my kind of team member. And I had Francis. He's my C-3PO. He translates. So in case my French isn't good enough, I turn to Francis. He's got the French for us, because they speak French as well as Arabic in Tunisia. So I got two team members. I got support. But what I really needed was information. So I'm not just going to waste my time. Tunisia is a huge country. It's as big as Florida. Imagine walking around Florida with a picture of a palm tree. Is this the right one? Is this the right one? No, we're going to need more clues than that. So I call Lucasfilm. I get through. I tell them, hello, I'm an archaeologist. I'm going in search of the Star Wars locations. What information would you have in the archives that would assist me in this quest? And what I find out is that back in the days, before GPS, before the internet, nobody wrote down where things were. When you made a movie, when you're finished, nobody keeps track of where you filmed it. All movie locations used to be lost because as soon as you're done making the movie, nobody cares what Arab village you were in, what dirt road you took every morning to shoot those scenes. You might have been shooting in that location for only 7 days and you're done. You'll never go back again. Why would somebody write it down? I didn't realize that, but that's what the archivist told me. So they said, we're sorry. We don't know. There's very little information about. We know one of the towns where one of the scenes was filmed, but that's about it. But we'll put you in touch with the production manager of Star Wars, Robert Watts. He's the man who scouted those locations. I thought, this guy, of course, he can tell me. This will be great. He's kind enough to call me from the location of the movie that he's shooting at this time, called Alive, I think, in Canada. He says, oh David, the archaeologist they told me about. Oh, it's wonderful. You're going to go back to the location. Oh, that's great. Star Wars, such a fun production. Oh, wonderful. George was terribly sick, but the rest of it was really good. He said, so you want to find out? Okay, oh, right. What do I remember? I said, well, now, David, I've made 20 movies since then. I've been all over the world. I had 3 or 4 movies in Morocco alone. I'm not sure I remember. Well, let me think. Now, you look for Luke Skywalker's home, right? Yes, Mr. Watts. Yes, okay. He said, well, I'm pretty sure every morning we drove out to that was on the left. I said, yeah. And he said, well, yeah, near Algeria. I'm pretty sure it was near Algeria. That's what he remembers. On the left, near Algeria. So I'm picturing myself a skeleton somewhere in the 6,000 miles of desert near Algeria. That's Algeria. That's Libya. This is Tunisia. Tunisia is a beautiful country, lots of different kinds of scenery, and you don't get executed there. All these are good reasons to go. Algeria and Libya, you can lose your head, arms, it's not convenient. And plus, like I said, the food's really much better in Tunisia. So for all these reasons, you want to be careful where you're going. Robert tried to help me, but there was only a little information he could give me. So that was all we had, and off we went. And we are going to Tunisia. So we go there with my friends. And the first thing we do, we start offshore. Because he did remember that Mos Eisley Spaceport, which is one of my key targets, he said, that was filmed, you know, David, we filmed that. That was on an island, I'm almost sure. An island? I didn't even know there were islands in Tunisia. What I learned was the biggest island that's off the coast of Tunisia figures into the Odyssey of Homer. It's the land of the lotus eaters, where Ulysses loses part of his crew. It's actually part of one of Homer's epics, but it's also the site of Mos Eisley Spaceport in Star Wars, if I can find it. So I thought, this is a good sign. This is encouraging. What I find is that Jerba is a big enough island that it's going to take a long time to explore, but Robert had thought there was something about a ferry dock, either in or near, where they shot Mos Eisley. Well, that cuts things down. That cuts down my search territory. So it's an island, and it's near the coast, which is astonishing. You wouldn't think you would film a desert planet scene on an island near the coast, but that's what the informants can help you find and cut down the search territory. Well, there's a bridge here. There's only one place where there's going to be a ferry. So we're going to look for Ajim. We get there, and that's my target zone. I've cut things down. Now it's more reasonable. I can wander around one town for a long time. Wandering around the entire island of Jerba, I will never find it. So we set out, and we find it's a desert island, lots of palm trees. It doesn't look like Tatooine at all. I would never have thought to look there if I didn't have that information from Robert Watts to guide us to start with. And this is the place where they created Mos Eisley Spaceport. Now look at this. This is the kind of thing that made me feel like that's real somewhere. Just, you could look at these buildings. They had a sense of age that you can't get through just making it up in a soundstage. Even when people are really good at creating the image of age, there's just too many details there that tell you this place is real. I loved that. That's what made me want to go there. So going to Tunisia, I end up learning how is it possible that they created this? Because once I studied Star Wars more closely, one of the surprising things I found was they were constantly having to make do with what they had because the budget was so tight. Now we think of Star Wars movies as huge, expensive productions today, but the first one was done on the cheap because they didn't have the money to film it like George Lucas wanted to. So they had to improvise about everything. And the island of Jerba was a tremendous help because when they get there, that's George Lucas filming his Mos Eisley Spaceport. Now they've brought all of this, right? They've built this crashed spaceship. But all of this, that's just Tunisian architecture. That's just what they found when they got to Jerba Island, because Robert Watts had found them places where as much as possible of it was already there. So all they have to do is add little pieces. They add technological bits. They add some funny antennas. The rest of it is natural local architecture. That's a way of economically using a location to make your movie, and it means your location is tremendously influencing the look that you get. Now they can do this on Jerba because of the style of architecture there. So when we see Luke Skywalker traveling through, all of that architecture in the background is just Jerba architecture. It's a style called Ibadite, I learned, that's named after the sect of Islam that it's associated with. And for them, they express reverence and holiness by a total lack of decoration. It's supposed to be a very honest and simple way of presenting yourself to Allah. And they use this in the mosque, but also in their homes. So everything's simplicity. That's the keynote of that culture, of the Ibadite culture. What that means is it gives you architecture with these interesting domes, and there's no decorations. Decorations are usually what made architecture looks Greek, or it looks like something from Spain, or it looks Arab. Without decorations, that architecture is a blank slate, just waiting for them to come and add a couple of antennas and turn it into Tatooine. So that's why Jerba Island was so important. You can look at a place like this and think, well, you cover up the minaret, add a few antennas, and we're on Mos Eisley. What I found when I get to Jerba is that this wonderful Ibadite architecture, they are destroying it as fast as they can. because they're embarrassed. They think, oh, it's not up to date. We're using cinder blocks now. Look at these. We've got mobile homes and cinder blocks. Instead of this beautiful Ibadite architecture, they're demolishing it all over the island. We're driving to Ajim, and I'm thinking, we're going to find nothing. This is a terrible pity. We get to these alleys. This is what I'm looking through in Ajim, and I'm lucky to find one little dome or anything. What a tragedy. We're driving around, and I think Mos Eisley has been erased from Jerba Island until we pass through this plaza. And I am jumping out of the Land Rover before it's even stopped because I say, look, look, there it is, there it is. They don't know what I'm talking about. One's a paleontologist, the other guy's a translator. What's the matter with you? I said, that window. I remember that window from a gum card that I bought in 6th grade. That's the window. I said, that's proof that we're here. That means we are in Mos Eisley. My dad thought I wasted my allowance on these gum cards. They were a wise investment, although they were definitely an influence on young minds. We do have to be careful. But that window was the key. I knew that is what we had seen in the movie, and that is what is right in front of me. So I have found the cantina. That's the proof. That's the way this works, taking one identifiable detail. Because I couldn't memorize the whole town, so you look for detailed pieces that are going to still be there. They took away all the decorations, but the hard skeleton is still there. So I start exploring this place, and at least there's some of the architecture left. This is the cantina where they go and meet Han Solo and all of the far-out alien creatures, and the land speeders were parked outside. Some drunk Jawas were sacked out there. So I immediately, I want to see what's left of this place. I climb up on the walls and find out they've walled off the old section of town because they're embarrassed about it. I think it's beautiful. They're trying to destroy it. They say, we're sorry, we haven't torn this part down yet. I just think, this is so beautiful. I wish it was going to keep. But I find a few places that still look Mos Eisley, but most of it they're getting rid of as fast as they can. The culture's changing. Tunisia's moving into the 21st century like everybody else. As the culture changes, the city changes. The city's an expression of the people that build it. Archaeologists think this way. I'm thinking these kinds of things, but then I suddenly say, what? Oh my gosh, that's it. We gotta jump. I jump off the walls. I run over. The locals are saying, he's acting really excited about the oldest garbage in the village. Is that what an archaeologist is? That's somebody who likes garbage from America. That's interesting. So that's what they think an archaeologist is. But I've spotted this. That's a doorway from the cantina from 20 years ago, and the door that went in it is not far away. That is the door to a chicken coop now. I am so excited. This is the largest surviving piece of a Star Wars set in the world, and it's a chicken coop door. One of the fiberglass domes is now the watering trough for the goat. I am so excited about this door. I can't believe it. I'm taking pictures, and the owner is like, the door is nice, but like, you want a chicken? It's like, no, the door. And it's like, these archaeologists, these strange people. But this is the door that we saw in the movie. It's right there. That's the door frame that Luke Skywalker walked through. Now it's working. It's like the rag doll. If there's anything left, it's going to stay. If somebody has not disturbed it, if somebody has not systematically reduced it to dust in the desert, it will stay. At this point, now I'm confident. If I can find Mos Eisley, we're going to find the rest of this stuff. So my friends are starting to think maybe it is possible to set foot on a foreign alien planet. So that's our first target, was Mos Eisley Spaceport. From here, we head deep inland. Now I'm looking for the site where they filmed Luke's home. This was the one place where Lucasfilm had been able to help me. I even knew from the back of the gum cards that Luke Skywalker's underground home was filmed in a place called Matmata. I love this underground home. It was a look that we'd never seen before in cinema. A cave, which is at the height of primitivism, with high-tech stuff. That combination of primitive and high-tech. Nobody had ever seen it before. That's all George Lucas's idea. But in order to realize it, he needed the locations of Tunisia to bring it to life. That's how the locations are shaping things. And so just like at Ajim, the crew shows up, they take existing Tunisian architecture and they dress it as little as possible. And what I found is I ended up talking to Roger Christian, who was the set decorator. He's now a friend of mine. He got an Oscar for his work on Star Wars. He said, David, if you look, anything you see in Mos Eisley, you have seen somewhere else in the movie, because everything we built, we had to use it in every scene because we had so little. So the evaporators that you see in Luke's home, those are the same ones that we saw in Mos Eisley, the same robots, everything the same. We just try to rearrange it. to make the cinema magic. They did brilliant work creating so much out of so little. Here, they can create these homes, these sets, because the Matmata folks are troglodytes. Troglodyte means you build your home in a cave. They are excavating their homes into the ground for thousands of years in Matmata because the sandstone is so soft that you can dig into it. It protects you from the sun in the summer. It protects you from the cold winds in the winter. It's a great way to build your home. So the crew had showed up and taken a hotel, an underground hotel, and they had redressed it as Luke's home to make that set. They could never have afforded to build all of that stuff themselves. They had to work with what was there. The location is inherently shaping Star Wars in these powerful ways. So when I get there, I just want to know, is there going to be anything left? This is the scene we'd seen in the movie. I'm looking for those alcoves, and yes, they're still there. Now, are there going to be any pieces from the set? That's what I really want to know. So we get down there and start looking, and I find edging. That was put there by the film crew. That was there in the movie because I remember it. That had been right there behind Luke and his aunt. That was it. We are still in the Hotel City Driss in Matmata. And what about that ceiling mural? Was that still going to be there? I really hoped it would, and it was. That mural had not been disturbed for 20 years. And it was created for the movie. It's a Berber style of artwork. You can imagine in a Berber kitchen, if you're living underground, there's no place for the smoke to go, so your kitchen gets black on the ceiling. Somebody had the idea that every year you could scratch a pattern into the ceiling and make artwork. John Barry showed up in Matmata and said, that's really cool. I'll do that for Star Wars too. So you get a Berber mural inside Luke Skywalker's dining room in Star Wars because the ceilings get all covered with soot in a Berber kitchen. So I love the way that these landscapes, they could not have made the movie anywhere else. Tunisia is heavily influencing the look and the feel of Star Wars. Our next target is deep inland in Tozur. This was a name that Robert Watts had given me. I know the film crew had stayed in Tozur. That we knew. Anything more about it, he didn't remember. So we'll go to Tozur. I find myself wandering around in a city that looks like it came out of the Bible. It's all brick. It's completely ancient everywhere. And I start thinking, it's going to be tricky here. I'm looking for Star Wars Canyon. I've checked the geology of Tunisia. I've gone through the whole country studying maps. There are very few places that have the relief that would be necessary to film the scenes that I'd seen in Star Wars. These are some big cliffs, not that many places. And if Robert Watts said they'd stayed in Tozur, that narrows down my search territory. That starts making it a manageable amount of space. So I go in, I'm trying to find somebody who'll take me to see a canyon. And I get these people, you want to talk to Habib. Habib will take you to canyon. And I'm thinking, I'm not smuggling machine guns or anything. That's not what I'm actually talking about. But they're talking about, like, no, we understand. I was like, no, really, I'm not smuggling. No, we understand. So I go into these dives. I get passed from Habib to Abdul to Mahmoud. And I finally get the guy who says, yes, I will take you to canyon. And I say, I actually got a specific canyon that I'm looking for. So like here, this is the canyon I'm looking for. He looks at the picture once and just puts it down. And he says something in Arabic that's basically like, well, that's the real trick, isn't it? And it will cost you extra. And I was like, didn't I hear this in the movie? Didn't we do something like this? Han Solo going to Alderaan. It's spooky, the echoes, but it's really happening. But we finally work out a deal, and I get him to take me off-road to the canyon of Qasr Sidi Bou Halal. That's the only place I've seen where the canyon looked big enough to be the one that we've seen in the movie. Now, it's guarded by a shrine to the saint. Qasr is a shrine or a building. Sidi is saint, and Bou Halal, that's the guy who died somewhere in the 14th century, and the shrine is the guardian of the cliff site. Well, I go up there, I meet with the site guardian, and behind that shrine, I see cliffs that look pretty good for a key scene in Star Wars that it was scored by a great piece of music. I thought that's going to be the overlooked cliffs. I go out on this cliff, and I'm looking at that hooked bluff there. That was something I had seen in the movie. That was exactly the same spot. And standing up there felt like being on the movie screen. I'm standing up there, the winds are terrific. They had to actually drill into the ground and put metal hooks to anchor the cameras because the wind was so strong. So this is an amazing location. And this overlook is where the characters are looking at Mos Eisley. As soon as I found that, as soon as I found one location, I bet almost all the other canyon locations are nearby, because you're a film crew. You've got 60 people working on every shot. We're going to shoot this here. We're not going to go 6 miles that way and 10 miles that way. We're going to try to shoot as many of these things in one place as we can. So, but it's still a canyon. There's thousands of places to look. So I start looking for every possible detail. As we go out to the bluff there, that's the shrine. I've now come out to the bluff. I notice that little piece, one little detail, that's what helps you pin a location. That is something that I had seen in the reverse shot when they're filming those characters looking in that scene that we just saw. Again, that lets me know I'm in the right place. I'm looking at everything, every detail. What do I remember from the gum cards, from any of the stills that I've gotten? Because back in those days, you couldn't do a screenshot. You had to take a film picture off the television. It's ancient technology, what we had to use. Not as easy as you got it today. I'm studying all those little pictures in my reference kit, and I find something. This is from the video that we shot. I'm excited again. The guys do the same thing. What is he about now? It was the window last time. What is it now? I said, those 3 rocks, the 3 rocks. I call those the 3 sisters. You give things names. When you're an explorer, when you're trying to discover things, it's easier to find something if you call it the 3 sisters. Now, that's interesting, the 3 sisters. Have you found the 3 sisters yet? No, I'm still looking for the 3 sisters, but I think we'll find the 3 sisters. You give it a name, it's easier to find. That's an actual discovery technique. I found this, and that was something I had been able to memorize from the movie. 3 rocks in a row. It's the same place. Now, how can I do this? I can't memorize an entire canyon. There's 1,000 details just there. And any of that vegetation, it's going to have changed in the 20 years. But some detail, like the window, that's not going to get changed by time. That's the key. That's what you go looking for. And that's what taught me that I was right in the correct location for this, where the Tusken Raiders are shooting at the land speeder. And now I know that is the right valley. So now we've got the right canyon. Now there's side canyons all the way through. I want to go down on the canyon floor, see what we can find down there, because I know this is the right place. Because my friends have now said, wait a minute, okay, this whole 3 sisters business, so there's technique behind this. You're not just totally insane. I was like, what, we get this far and now you're willing to give me credit that I'm not totally crazy? Yes, there's a technique. I teach them about how I'm looking for these key things. I said, look, bingo. Here's an example of another one. I'm looking which of the canyons that we're looking down into, which ones do we need to go and explore? Well, that's one of those features that I've been looking for. That's the cave that we see behind Ben Kenobi. I'm sure that's it, because that's on my short list of things that we might be able to see from any different angle. So we go down there, because that's going to be it. It doesn't take very much difficulty to line up exactly that shot and see the place where we'd seen in the movie. The land speeder, Ben finds Luke. My friends have seen how this works enough now that they're like, okay, we can be archaeologists too. What else can we look for? What's next? What else do we want to see in this canyon? And I said, okay, well, now that you understand, here's Land Speeder Point. Remember, give it a name. Now it's Land Speeder Point. Well, there's this hooked bluff, and there's that distinctive boulder. Now, whatever's happened in this canyon, that's not going to change. And that big boulder is probably still going to be there. So I see, this is what we go looking for. So we fan out. Now, what invariably happens, you try to teach somebody a little bit of archaeology, and they immediately think, oh, I'm an archaeologist too. So I'm up a side canyon, and Francis says, David, I think I've got it, I think I've got it. And it's like, he already thinks he's an archaeologist. I spent 5 years working on the PhD up to this point. He's not an archaeologist. I want to come all the way back out of the side canyon. I say, Francis, are you sure? And he says, well, didn't you say the boulder? I said, yeah, the boulder. He says, I'm pretty sure. He had gotten it. This was the right site. He was using the techniques. It does work. So we're happy. We're a team. We found what we're looking for. And he says, I can't believe I found it. I found it. I'm an archaeologist too. And I said, no, just wait a minute. Now, I set you up to find this. You know, I mean, there's going to be shared credit here. I mean, you don't think this is going to get published in a Canadian journal before it gets published in an English journal. There end up to be disputes about who exactly discovered what and how the credit should get apportioned. This is typical in exploration. Who discovered the source of the Nile? Is it Speke or Burton? This happens. But fortunately, Michael Ryan is watching and he says, stop it, you idiots. You shouldn't be fighting. You should be collaborating, because don't you see that cleft in the canyon, that wrinkle in the rock? You've discovered the Tusken Raider attack site. Teamwork. We should work together. Okay, Michael brings us back together. That's, of course, the way we should be proceeding. And we start to look for the place where the banthas are. And he says, stop, stop, stop. Wait, don't move. Francis, don't move your head. He said, why? I said, you found the Bantha Boulders Overlook site. I thought Francis went above and beyond in really copying C-3PO there. Don't you think? That's pretty darn good. So we had found these things thick and fast. At this point, I am feeling pretty good about my abilities to find sites on non-existent alien planets. I said, okay, I didn't think there was any realistic chance of being able to find this one, but now I'm so confident I'm going to find Jawa Rock. Remember, give it a name. So Jawa Rock is just a rock that was behind the Jawas when they zap R2-D2, but I thought it looked cool. I always liked it when I looked at the gum cards, and I thought, I can even find one rock in the Sahara Desert at this point. My friends are like, no, we will be surprised if you can pull this off, so show us. Because there's nothing, there's no horizon. Where are you going to find anything? There's no clues. There's a million rocks here. There's canyons everywhere. Ah, but wait, Grasshopper, secret await in behind the scenes footage. There's one behind the scenes photo that has crucial information. This is loaded with information that cuts down my search territories. What are we seeing here? First of all, the strata are at an angle. They're not level, they're at an angle. That's something easy to see even from far away. That's useful. The second thing is we're seeing black scarring here. You can see that in Arizona a lot. I don't know if you see it much in Nevada. Do you see that stuff here? It's called desert varnish in Arizona. It's manganese. And so you can spot that geology. When you've got manganese in a layer of the rock, it tends to weather out and stripe down the strata. So I know we need to look for a place with desert varnish, the manganese scars. But the most important clue is the sunlight. Look at that sunlight. That means the canyon walls are very short. We don't need to look at any of the places where the canyon walls are tall. So angled strata, the manganese, and short canyon walls, that cuts things way down. So that's a reasonable search territory. I know we need to go to either the far end of the canyon or the near end, one or the other, because it's where the canyon walls are low. And sure enough, we find we follow my geology. Pretty soon, angled strata, desert varnish, and that's an archaeologist who can find one rock in the whole Sahara Desert, which is pretty good. So that's Jawa Rock, discovered. Thank you. Now, everything that I've looked for so far has clues, landmarks, whether it's architecture or geology or something to look for that's concrete. I was pretty confident by this point, but the challenges keep changing. They keep getting harder. As we go farther inland, there's less and less to guide me in the search. What I'm looking for next was what was filmed on the salt flat of the Shot El Jared, called in Tunisia, the above ground site of Luke Skywalker's homestead. Now for me, this was actually the most powerful scene in Star Wars. It was the scene that I always loved the most, when Luke is looking at the double sunset and he feels like his life is hopeless. He's never going to go anywhere. He's never going to fulfill his dreams. There's nothing in his world to inspire him. The only colorful or beautiful thing in his world is something far off that he can never touch. That's all great visual storytelling. So you see how George Lucas has used a salt flat where there is literally nothing to see to get across to you that this character feels like his life is barren. So he doesn't have to take a lot of time telling you about how he feels. He shows you in a few scenes set in this salt flat, you feel that this is how this character feels about his life. It's empty, it's barren. That's visual storytelling that the location makes possible. But it doesn't give me very much to go on. The whole set is meant to look sparse. It's meant to look barren for the visual storytelling. There's almost nothing there. There's an entrance, a little dome building that looks like an igloo. There's a few of these little things. Where did we see those? We saw them in Mos Eisley. We saw those in Mos Eisley. Everything got reused. They turned this dome upside down and put it in the junk heap with the wrecked spaceship. Everything got reused. So all those things are going to be gone. I can't search for those. The landscape is a salt flat. It's the same for hundreds of miles in every direction. The only thing I have a chance of looking for are these craters. So that's supposed to be that the underground part of Luke's home is under there. That was filmed in Matmata, hundreds of miles away. Film editing puts them together. It was never there out in the salt flat. But it means I've got so little to look for. It would seem pointless, but I've been encouraged by what I've found in Tunisia so far, and trust in the technique that if we cut things down and just keep at it, I will find these places. So the salt flat is the Shot El Jared. It used to be a lake. It dried up thousands of years ago. When the water table gets high, it could still swallow caravans. So they built a military road across it in the 60s because they were still losing so many people trying to cross the Scheldt. When I get there, that is what it is like to look in a place with no landmarks of any kind. How? There's thousands of square miles of salt flat. Well, I go back to logistics. So it's a film crew. They're not explorers. So they're not going to be just anywhere on the Scheldt. They're going to be somewhere near the highways that existed in 1976 when the movie was made. So I got maps before we left of 1976 Tunisia, because I knew those roads, not the newer roads, those roads would show me the film crew had to be limited to be within 10 or 15 miles of those old roads. That cuts things down. And now we've got a big salt flat, right? We've got roads on it. What did Robert Watts say? The one thing he could remember about Luke Skywalker's home? I think that was on the left. Well, that cuts 50% of my search territory down. That's actually really useful information. So that's enough, is what I've got faith in. And we go out there, and for weeks, I follow every path off the highway that I can see. We take the rover out as far as it will go until the driver says, no, I'm not losing my rover for your crazy foreign planet hunt. And from there, we just searched on foot. But I followed every path that we could find, everyone, until I saw one ripple on the horizon. A ripple, but my heart jumped because I knew that ripple was my crater that I was looking for. And a key was there were traces of mirage along the horizon. I'd seen those in the movie, but I didn't know what they meant. It turns out it meant that there were sand dunes not far away. I knew not to spend as much time in the parts of the Scheldt where I didn't see horizon traces of mirage. That again cut down the search territory until I can actually find this crater ring. That was this. The first moment I saw it, it's rippling in the heat, but I can tell that's what I'm looking for. It's there. This is the same place. I walk out to this place like it's a dream. It feels like I am walking on the moon. This is something I had memorized from that card. It's Luke Skywalker's dream. That's me now. I am in that card. I'm in that movie. I'm on that planet. This is actually working. And the way it felt, like I'd spent every dollar I had. So it was expensive. It was a crazy thing to do. And it felt like being on the moon. You've just done something impossible. 360 degrees around me. There's nothing to tell me that I'm not on Tatooine. It felt real. It felt like the characters had been there. It was an incredible feeling. And nothing that I've been prepared for, because I never stopped to think, what would it really feel like if you could find those places? I never thought about that. I just thought I have to try. And when you finally feel it, it was incredible. So that gave me, again, hope and courage, because the next one is even more impossible. This is the last and hardest thing, is the dunes. All I really wanted to try to find was dunes that looked like where they had shot the movie, because everything that had been in the Dune Sea in the movie had walked out of it by the time the movie was over. There'd been stormtroopers, those are gone. There'd been this giant lizard that the stormtroopers ride. Well, they took that away. Where did we see that again? In Mos Eisley. They reused it, so you see that in the background. Anything that they used, they had to reuse to make the movie economically. So what do I look for? The escape pod where the droids crash land? No, that was reused in Mos Eisley, turned upside down, and you see it in the background. They've removed everything. I asked Robert Watts, what about that sandworm skeleton that you see with C-3PO wander by? That here, remember that? And he said, well, I know where the skull of that is, David. He said, that's over my fireplace. He said, when I have my hunter friends come over sometimes, I just point to that and they shut right up. This giant skull of this toothed creature. I don't tell them, yeah, that was Star Wars. So that was gone. I said, but you didn't take the rest of the bones, right? He said, well, yeah, but that's 20 years of sandstorms. Even if they were still there, I mean, they'd be blown halfway to Egypt. You're never going to find any of those pieces, but you can find an area that looks like that. I would be content just to find something that looked like that same kind of area. It's the same procedure of driving the rover out as far as it would go into the sand. There are dune fields all over southern Tunisia. Again, I am going out into the dune fields. I'm looking through every one. I did find Camelot. And sometimes we go out by camel. You have to dress like an Arab if you don't want the camels to spit on you. Because if you're wearing a sand cloak, the camels think that one of the things that goes with a sand cloak is a big club that the Arabs beat the camels with if they spit. So if they see you in Western clothes, the camels spit on you. If they see you wearing one of those, they leave you alone. So my Arab friends were finally like, look, wear this. And I'm like, why? And they're like, you'll see. And I would see that the camels spit on the European tourists, and the Berbers were like, So you learn how to deal with camels, which are not domesticated animals, but that's a whole nother story. I'm so excited to find the Star Wars stuff. I find a city that is not on the maps, a ruined city. I don't know how old it is, hundreds of years, thousands. I'm so determined to find Tatooine by this point that I say, you know what, we'll come back to the lost city later. I am after really big game. I want to find some proof. Those are fiberglass bones. Think of that rag doll. These are fiberglass bones. That'd be almost impossible to destroy. So sure, they could have been scattered, but they've got to be here in the desert somewhere. And what have I learned? Local informants are incredibly valuable. So I talked to every Berber and every Berber family that I could meet. The Berbers are the people who actually live in the desert. So the Arabs are the people who came in and conquered. The Berbers are the people that have been living there for thousands of years. I talked to everybody. I learned as much Berber as I could. And I showed them my search kit. They all thought I was crazy, but they were nice people. And I keep going through this until one day we meet a small Berber family. They just got one camel. They're trooping around. And one kid, the littlest kid, I think it was this guy, the blue, he looked at my Star Wars gum card and said in French, because he was the only one who knew French. He was young enough to be learning the new European language. And he said, "Skelette?" I thought, skeleton. That's French for skeleton. He's seen a bone. Now my friends are saying, you know, he's seen a camel, right? He's not going to have seen a dinosaur bone. He saw a camel. I said, camel bone is close enough. If it's just a dead camel, I'll at least feel like C-3PO walking past its skeleton in the desert. So we go trooping off over the dunes based on what this little kid remembers. 2 years ago, he might have seen a piece of bone. But as soon as the kid says, "Skelette," his father is like, "This is different. My son knows the way. We will go." And we march. And we go trooping until we get to the crest of a dune that we're trooping all over. We finally stop. And the father says, "You will go alone." He holds everybody else back. And I look over this dune, and no kidding, down in that valley were fiberglass dinosaur bones. Fiberglass dinosaur bones. I thought it had to be pieces of a camel, right? But we get up to them, and they are the bones from Star Wars. Now, my buddy Michael is a paleontologist, right? This is the first time he's discovered dinosaur bones in the Sahara, and he's just about to cry because they're plastic. I'm thrilled that they're plastic, but he's like, why couldn't it have been real sauropod bones? And I'm like, you don't understand. This is Star Wars. It's priceless. There were pieces of that dinosaur everywhere. We went and got them together. This is poor Michael posing with his dinosaur that he didn't get to name, but don't feel bad for him because later he discovers 2 new species of dinosaurs. So he gets to find his own dinosaur, so he works out fine. Because Michael is a trained paleontologist, I can learn from him that the particular shape of that vertebra shows that it's the atlas axis, which is the first vertebra you have. It has a pointed end rather than a curved end like the other ones. That means that we know it's precisely that bone. So I can identify the individual bone that this was on the scene in Star Wars. It's absolutely astonishing. That was the most unbelievable of everything that I'd found. When I get back, what an archaeologist does when he's got a successful expedition, he's gone out to search, he's found what he does, he publishes a report, right? This is what you do. You call a journal editor. You say, what you've got, would you like to publish it in the journal? So I call the Star Wars Insider magazine. Do you want to hear about this? It's the closest I can get to a journal that would want to publish a journey to Tatooine. It's the only time I've ever had a journal editor read my project proposal, the description of my article, and say, dude, that rules! I get the cover of Star Wars Insider. This is incredible. I can't believe you did this. So it gets written up. It becomes famous. What happened at this point just is unbelievable coincidence. At the time when this magazine article came out, it was late 1995. I'd done the project early in 1995. This was exactly the same time when George Lucas was at Skywalker Ranch preparing to make a new series of movies, the Star Wars prequels. He turned to his producer, Rick McCallum, and he said, "Rick, we're going to need to shoot some scenes on Tatooine for the new prequels. I'd like to use the old locations again. Go back to Tunisia, check out the old locations that we used before, and find me some new ones, and let me know what condition they're in, and we'll make our plans." Rick says, "Yes, sir, Mr. Lucas." He calls the archives at Skywalker Ranch. What do you think they told him? "We don't have any information about the sites. Back before GPS, back before the internet, nobody keeps records of that stuff, not even the archives at Skywalker Ranch." So Rick McCallum is left with a mission from George Lucas, and it's like, you don't go back to George and say, "No, I couldn't," because that's usually your last day on the job. What's he going to do? That week, somebody comes into his office and says, "Rick, weren't you talking about the Tunisian locations? Look, some kid went and found them all." Puts the magazine on his desk. No one could believe this coincidence. It's astonishing. But I had become the only person in the world who knew where those locations were at a time when George Lucas needed to find them. So I'm on the phone with Rick, who is astonished. "I'm talking to Rick McCallum. This is really cool. I'm just a Star Wars fan. I can't believe I'm talking to George's #1 guy." And he says, "So, honey, this is incredible. You actually found these locations. I don't believe it. It's amazing, just wonderful." And I say, "Well, gosh, thanks, Mr. McCallum. I mean, I sort of thought you'd think it was crazy." And he says, "Oh, honey, this is mentally ill and you need help, but it's really going to help us a lot. So I'm very glad." Now listen, what we're going to do is I'm going to fax you a map, mark some X's on it for me, and fax it right back, okay? Love ya. Now, I've just put every penny I had into finding these things. And I've just learned that I'm the only person in the world who knows where they are. So I think long and hard about how I'm going to handle this, but I call him back. An X is such a vague thing, and Tunisia is such a big country. He said, I really think you don't need so much a map, you need a guide. And there's this long silence. And Rick says, "So that's how it is, huh?" And I say, "Well, yeah, that's how it is." And he says, "Well, okay, so you want to come with us? Fine, but we're leaving in 5 days. You ready?" And I said, "Rick, I'm an archaeologist. I'm always ready for adventure." Hang up the phone. I'm going to be a location scout for Lucasfilm. There's a wrinkle. I'm about to defend my PhD dissertation. 3 weeks from now. Now, you're not supposed to even leave campus because you're supposed to be just living in terror of what if they refuse, what if they refuse, what if they refuse? Because if your dissertation fails, you've just wasted 6 years of your life. So that happens, and the people that come out of those meetings are pretty crushed people. So you're supposed to be living in terror that they're going to turn down your dissertation. You're not supposed to leave campus. You're certainly not supposed to leave the country. You're definitely not supposed to go off and be a location scout for Lucasfilm. I've got 6 years into my PhD, or do I say yes to location scouting with Lucasfilm? Well, there wasn't much of a decision there. So of course I'm going back to Tunisia with Lucasfilm. I take Rick to the dunes. He can't believe this. "You really did this?" I show him the bones in the sand. He's absolutely astonished. I take him to Ajim, and he says, "Look, some unidentifiable fragment of the set. My God, this is really fiberglass. This really was where George was 20 years ago." I said, "That's not unidentifiable, Rick. That's a dewback tether ring from outside the cantina. I missed it before because it was still under some garbage." He says, "Dewback tether ring." I said, "Yeah." He said, "That's what they teach you in archaeology school, is it?" I said, "Well, no," but he said, okay, I see this. I'm an archaeologist too now. It's like, okay, I've heard this before, right? Everybody's an archaeologist, but he wants to find something. I'm in, let's go. What else? Is there something else you haven't found? I said, "Well, yeah, I never did get time to look for Ben Kenobi's home." We race off around Jerba. We've got to find something. Rick wants to be an archaeologist too. We're driving along the coast. I do that again. We're driving along the coast. I see a fisherman's hut. And I say, "Stop, stop, stop." We're going 45 miles an hour. I say, "Stop." I said, "I think that's Ben Kenobi's home." He said, "It can't possibly be. There's an ocean behind it. Ben Kenobi's home was in the desert. And I know for a fact they didn't have the money on Star Wars to do a special effect to get rid of an ocean. So this can't be it." And I said, "Don't forget movie magic, Mr. McCallum. What if you crouched down so that the foreground covered up the ocean? Wouldn't that maybe be it?" And he said, "No, that couldn't be. And there's no way you're going to spot that at 45 miles an hour." But his production designer, Gavin Bouquet, is looking at my little patch of photos, and he says, Rick, I think he's got it. And of course I had it. At this point, I could spot this stuff at 45 miles an hour. So I take Rick, the last thing we were looking for was the outskirts of Mos Eisley, which is of course a mosque, now that I know about Ibadite architecture. And it was on the far tip of the island, but yes, we finally find the lost city of Star Wars and complete the whole quest. So then he's impressed. I didn't know you archaeologists could do this. I said, well, at least this one can. He said, well, you know, we're actually here, not just to look at the old locations, but we're going to be working on a Star Wars prequel. And I say, yeah, I kind of guessed that. He said, well, we're going to need some new locations. There's going to be slave quarters for young Anakin Skywalker. Do you have any ideas? And I said, Tunisia is full of wonderful architecture. Yes, I've got some ideas. There's a place that I always thought ought to have been in Star Wars. I took Rick to Medellin. This is a Xar. It's a granary. It's a communal granary. Everybody that had fields would bring their harvest, and everybody for one family, you build one of these. You put them all together, and it protects you from raiders. So that's where everybody would put their harvest. It's beautiful architecture. It's the kind they were trying to destroy as fast as possible now. I said, this belongs in Star Wars. I pitched this as the slave quarters, and 2 years later, George Lucas is in Medellin filming Mike Xar as the slave quarters of Anakin Skywalker. So I've not only walked onto Tatooine, I've walked across the boundary from watching the show to creating it, which is totally blowing my mind, right? We finished this trip in the desert with me and Lucasfilm, and we got along really well. Rick was saying, you know, I thought you were just going to be totally crackers to begin with, but you'd be useful. But I kind of like you. Why don't you come back with us to Skywalker Ranch? I said, I am an archaeologist. What do you need an archaeologist for at Skywalker Ranch? And he said, well, look at all the stuff you've done. Look, you can do this, you can do that. You look at the communications you've done. I bet we could find something. I said, really? And again, I had to think, I just finished my PhD now. So why would I want to go to Lucasfilm? But I thought about it, and I thought, academics like me, we're not the best people in the world at sharing our story, at explaining why is it important to study ancient Rome, and what are we learning from ancient Egypt that makes our life better now? Why do we care? We're not great at that. I thought, Lucasfilm, these are some of the best storytellers in the world. They reach everybody. They reach young and old and people in the United States and foreign countries. I could learn a lot about communication from these guys. And I thought long and hard about it, but I ended up accepting that job. And I went to Skywalker Ranch. They gave me their website to run. I took the StarWars.com website that nobody looked at, and in 9 months it was one of the world's top 100 by traffic. They let me cut theatrical trailers. I cut the teaser trailer with the editor. I was his creative consultant. He cut it, but it was just the two of us on these trailers, and they were the most popular trailers of all time. One day they came in and said, quick, how tall are you? Like, so you're working at Skywalker Ranch, strange things happen. Somebody runs into your office and says, how tall are you? It's like, 5'10 3/4", something, I don't know. They say, get down to the archives, you're late. I go down to the archives and I find that, well, they need somebody to wear the Boba Fett costume for a photo shoot. And they've never had somebody the right size on the ranch, but you look like the right size. They're suiting me up as Boba Fett in the original film-used costumes. Because at that time, the costumes were too expensive. They'd never made copies the way they'd made copies of Stormtroopers or Darth Vader for public appearances. It fit me like it was tailored. So for 2 years, I'm Boba Fett for public appearances and advertisements. It's like PhD, published on medieval Africa, ancient Rome, and he was Boba Fett. You never know. The publishing came to me and said, what kind of books would you like to do? I said, well, I'm an archaeologist. I would love to take the Star Wars artifacts and the ships and treat it all like it was real. They gave me the visual dictionaries. Nobody had ever done books like this about a fictional universe. Now, we do it all the time, but these were the first ones. They said there's not enough information. It's a fictional universe. It's just a story. There won't be enough. But they had heard, isn't there an archaeologist at Skywalker Ranch? Like, couldn't he make up stuff? And yeah, he could make up stuff. I got to make up the backstories for Han Solo and all this kind of thing. They gave me the Millennium Falcon and told me make up the way its engines work. And I got to create this Star Wars technology. That's even me. We didn't have a clear enough picture of Darth Vader's helmet that we could put big on the cover. We had the original Darth Vader suit. We keep sitting it on the mannequin. It keeps falling over. And they said, what can we put it on that won't move? David. We'll put it on David. I'm Darth Vader. That's Darth. I know nobody ever recognizes me, but that is me. Star Wars started out as something, as a fantasy world with basis in the real world. The fact that it was inspired by the real world, that there were real world locations shaping this in all the ways that you've seen, shaping the art direction, contributing to the storytelling. Star Wars started out as an imaginary world that was so based in reality that I wanted to be there. I wanted to visit that world as vividly as I could, and hunting the locations was the best way that I found to do it. In the end, I did set foot on Tatooine, and I did cross over and come into the other side as a creator of the Star Wars saga. I worked with them for years. So watching the Star Wars movies for me now is like watching home movies, because I know all the people, I know all those places. I was there, I did things there. I see pieces of Star Wars. I see things in costumes that people bring in, and it's like, I invented that. It's such a great feeling to see other people using these things now. So this is all a testament to what can happen when you get an inspiration. And it doesn't have to make sense if you feel strongly about it. If there's something in you that says, I just really want to do that. It can be your age. You don't know. And you find something you really love and think, I could do that. You don't listen to the people who say you can't do it, because they're wrong. You listen to the people who say, maybe you could, because they will be right, just like my friends were. I ended up doing these Star Wars things, which was fun. But what was really important was that I learned that what that Star Wars movie taught was true. About if you follow inspiration, it really can take you to places that you never thought were possible. And that's the most important thing that I hope you will take away from this presentation. Thank you very much. Now, I'm happy to take questions if anybody's got them. Yes?
Did you write a dissertation on your Star Wars trip?
Not a bit. Nope. No, so I wrote plenty about the Star Wars trip elsewhere, but the dissertation was about a giant marble map of the city of Rome commissioned by one of the emperors, 40 feet high, 60 feet wide, with every ground floor room in the city carved into it. So I did a proper dissertation. It's very respectable. Yes, very respectable. Other questions?
That's fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
A chance to throw it in the face of the archaeologists who originally told you this is crazy for reasons.
So I kept it really quiet, right? And when I went to Tunisia with Lucasfilm, I had to do a whole bunch of things to cover my tracks. So I only had one person in Ann Arbor who knew I was leaving. But I had him ready to say, oh yeah, I saw David just yesterday, so he's on campus somewhere. I sent faxes on Friday that I knew wouldn't be picked up until the next Monday or Tuesday. And I dated them like that I'd sent it on the Monday or Tuesday. And I left phone messages, so I knew she wouldn't be back into her office until Thursday. So I could make it sound like, well, David was just here. I don't know where he is now, but he was just here. So I covered my tracks so that nobody knew. But there came a day when I had to decide whether I was going to accept that Lucasfilm job offer. And I decided that it was an offer I couldn't refuse. And I took everybody out to dinner. And that's when I told them, I'm not going to take that job at UCLA. Actually, I'm going to Skywalker Ranch. What? And I explained what happened, and just everybody was absolutely stunned. But I said, don't you remember Schliemann? We really shouldn't have made fun of him. So that's how that played out. Thanks. Yes?
Of all the props that you found, did you take any home and now keep them in your house?
So the chicken coop door, right? So when I came back with Lucasfilm, they said, look, you can't leave this stuff. It's just going to get all taken. And I realized they were right. So the chicken coop door I negotiated for and bought and returned, and it's now on display at the world's largest Star Wars memorabilia museum. So that's near the site of Lucasfilm in California. A friend of mine named Steve Sansweet has the largest Star Wars collection in the world, and he's got that door on display. And Lucasfilm took some of the sandworm bones, and those are in the archives. The claw is also on display at Steve Sansweet's place, because I wanted them not in my house, but in a place where people could see it and share it. So that's the things that I took, I put in a place where other people could enjoy them. Other questions? All right, now there's cards outside that I'm happy to sign for you. Either you can take them if they're already signed. If you want them initialized to you, I'm happy to do that. Did you have one question?
Did you meet George Lucas?
Oh yes, he was my boss for years.
Okay, so once you started working for Lucas, you pretty much met everybody then.
Yes, and so like nobody's like pals with George because he's a billionaire and he's a little different from the rest of us. I mean, this is a billionaire who will wait behind you in line at the cafeteria, which is pretty cool, right? But he's not like your buddy pal. So like when I say, yes, I knew George Lucas, it means that like he wouldn't call security when he saw me. So, but I did, like for a long time when there were quotes that people wanted, like MIT wants a quote from George Lucas on space exploration and the importance of space exploration. He's like, I don't have time for that, get David to do it. So I would write things and try to think like he did, and then I would write the quotes, and if he liked it, he would sign it, or he would change, I wouldn't say that, but this is okay. So I got to work with him that close, which was really cool. And every bit that he taught me, like during the production of some of the films, he was interested enough in my books that he read the manuscripts. He never reads the stuff in publishing. But when he heard about the project, he wanted to make sure that this was right on. He read the manuscripts and corrected anything he thought was wrong, but was really happy with the way that I'd gotten in tune with what he was trying to do. So it was a real privilege to get to work directly with him. Yes?
Did you keep in touch with anyone after you filmed the movie?
Well, sure. Yeah, a lot of these people are my friends now. So I love getting to meet all of the model makers and the costume designers and ask them all the questions that I'd had, because I had so many questions. As a kid, I always wanted to know, and there was no one for me to ask. Books like the ones that I wrote didn't exist when I was a kid, so I couldn't find out the answers. I had to draw them for myself. I would write things that eventually, a lot of them got published in my books because I wanted the answers to those questions. So yes, I kept in touch with everybody that I met, and model makers and the set decorator, Roger Christian, who got his Oscar for doing all of that decoration in Mos Eisley. I talked to him pretty often. So they were a great bunch of people. It was an honor to meet them, and they turned out to be mostly really cool people too. So you bet I keep in touch with them. Did somebody over here have one too? Yes?
Out of all the objects you found in the sites, which one is your favorite?
Which object that I found at the sites was my single favorite? That would probably be the claw of the sandworm thing, because I didn't expect it. It had a claw. Like, it was the kind of thing, what I loved best was seeing things there in Tunisia that you couldn't see in the movie, that were just off the camera, and parts of Luke's home that were never in the movie. That felt really great because I'd studied the movie and everything in it so much that any new piece, if that's part of Star Wars, but we never saw it before, that was exciting. So it's like, I don't know why, but the fact that the sand monster had a claw, I thought that was cool. So that was probably the single one that was the most fun. Thanks. Yes?
Were you disappointed by how the prequels were received, especially given how much hard work went into?
Well, I mean, so they became different. George is at a different life stage when he made the prequels. So he's got young kids when he made the prequels. So he was aiming at a much younger audience. When he made the first film, he also didn't have as much influence because he was trying to do something so new and so original that it was really difficult for him to communicate his vision. So I got to talk with him about this. I got him to myself in his office one afternoon. I finally got to ask him all the questions that I'd wanted to ask. And I found out he was so disappointed with Star Wars, with what we call A New Hope now. He's like, that movie was never what I intended for it to be. I never wanted it to be like that. Nobody understood what I was trying to do. So all of these terrific talents that worked with him, that contributed to it so much from my standpoint, to him, they messed up what I was trying to do. I didn't want it to be so serious. I didn't want it to be so realistic. I wanted it to be more fun and light. And so it's like, well, I really like the realistic stuff. No, I don't like that. So what I loved in Star Wars turned out to be a lot of the things that really disappointed George. But it just shows when you create a great artwork, like Leonardo da Vinci paints the Mona Lisa. What's cool about that painting? Maybe what we think is cool about it is totally different from what he likes about it. A great artwork can be greater than the artist that creates it, and I respect that. So I don't need to agree with George about what's the greatest thing about Star Wars. That's okay for me. So he was making different kinds of movies when he made the prequels, and that wasn't the same sort of thing that inspired me. So the movies that worked for me was that original trilogy that hit me at the right age. So they find a different audience, and I understand things change. It's never going to be the same. Yes?
What would you like to have the younger generation know about archaeology? I can't pronounce it.
Archaeology?
Yes.
What would I like to have the younger generation know about archaeology is that what we're doing with archaeology, if it has value, it's not just learning about the ancient world and what somebody did 1,000 years ago. The value of it is, what can we learn about ourselves as people, about the mistakes that we made in the past, about things that we did right, things that we've learned, and mistakes that we made where we got it wrong, the way we build a city or design a government, or how do we raise a family. We've got thousands of years of experience of successes and failures. Archaeology is a way to learn from all of that. If archaeology has a real value to me, it's helping us make fewer mistakes, to learn from the past and make quality of life better today. That's where I think its value is. That's what I would like for people to know. Thank you guys very much.